I despise Natsuki Subaru. No, sorry, not that Subaru. That's end of the show Subaru. He's an okay guy. He's at least a better fellow than he was at the beginning of the show. Which is why I'm talking about this repulsive little dangus. You know, Subaru at the start of the show, who makes everything about his want for a relationship with Amelia and about sex or at least some other form of physical intimacy with any of the other ladies. Other than Betty, I don't think he ever gets sexual with Betty. But Betty is a beautiful soul who deserves divine protection, so that's only natural. After saying all of this, you might be surprised to learn that ReZero sits right up there with the likes of Neon Genesis Evangelion and Breaking Bad on my Word document titled Proof That I'm a Tasteless Casual. See, I don't think people in general like the idea of ReZero being compared to Evangelion. Sure, ReZero has got a lot of 9s and 10s. It's got a motive 9, which is pretty impressive. I learned something in stats. But, I don't know. So many of the discussions I see surrounding this show go something like, yeah, it's good, but it's really not that good. At least people love Rem, though. I mean, look at this. 3,879 images of Rem. That's a lot of Rem. That might even be too much Rem. As I was saying, 3,879 images of Rem. That's a lot of Rem. And as we all know, there's no such thing as too much Rem. What was I saying again? Oh yeah, that ReZero is one of my favorite shows. And oddly enough, it's one of my favorite shows because of our good old boy Subaru, who definitely has a disease called light novel protagonist syndrome. The symptoms of this disease include, but are not limited to, obvious meta-references about one's own situation, talking to yourself a bit too much, constantly thinking about how much you want to be with your waifu, not really being strong, but constantly acting like you're king shit, being blatantly a self-insert, yada yada you, blah blah blah, you get the point. Subaru isn't the most interesting protagonist. Or is he? See, all of ReZero is designed around the idea that it needs to be typical for quite a while. Sure, there can be some cool, more unique ideas sprinkled in here or there, usually in the form of Subaru's return by death ability, but overall, the status quo cannot be upset too much. And that's the point. ReZero spends almost half of its run frolicking around through a land of typical light novel themes and ideas before, turning the whole situation on its head. Without these seemingly mundane or at the least typical moments, this show loses all of its meaning, and really its point for existing. While the meta-commentary of ReZero is by no means subtle, that does not make it bad. I wouldn't exactly call the taste of lemon meringue pie subtle, but I still eat up that stuff, so why should anime be any different, really? And yes, I like stupid comparisons. At the least, though, this is definitely worth discussing. The meta aspects of ReZero actually start off in a fairly well-grounded manner, with Subaru reading a manga and talking about how this is the part of the story where they suck you in. This gives us the sense that Subaru feels a bit too obviously manipulated by whatever he's reading. And what is the show doing itself as he says this? Employing what I view as one of the most lazy writing tactics. A jump forward to some point of conflict to get us immediately invested, and to have us waiting for whatever else is to come. Now, I said lazy, but that word might be a bit too harsh, and that definitely doesn't make it an inherently bad thing. At the least, it definitely puts us in the right mindset. From now on, we're waiting for this horrific scene to come about. But the creators have also acknowledged the audience's feelings here through Subaru. Yeah, this is typical, but we know that, bear with us. Normally I'd call this lampshading, which I'm pretty much against all the time, but I don't think we can quite consider this lampshading when the show is going to actually use these typical plot devices to accentuate its meaning later on. In these opening moments, we also have some of the most important aspects of Subaru's character established. First, that he wants a relationship. He sees this happy couple walking by and he sighs. It may be a brief moment. In fact, it's a moment someone could even miss and that I missed my first time watching through. But it's still there, and it still sets up his character. Second, we see Subaru's concern with everyday and really unimportant aspects of life, like what type of store-bought noodles he wants or the fact that he wants to keep his grooved edge coin. Are these concerns I sometimes have? Yeah, definitely. If somebody offers me sour cream and onion chips or all dressed chips, I don't know what to do. That's a big decision. Either way though, these are definitely not concerns that a hero would have. Subaru is a normal dude living a normal life. And as that's all that we need to know about him, the show is content to immediately send him swooping off into a fantasy world. Subaru's reaction to this fantasy world may be even more telling about his character, and makes this show feel like a parody, which it sometimes is. He just accepts that he's in a new world. No panicking, no wondering how he's going to get back, no thinking about, the people he left behind or anything he had to do. And considering that just a moment ago he was crossing the street, you would think he would be at least a little bit concerned about what happened. That's another thing I really like though. How Subaru's move to this new world is so mundane. He doesn't find some glorious portal or some fancy sword or meet up with some glorious goddess that doesn't wear pants. He just happens to get pulled into this world. Soon we see Subaru's arrogance, or at least his belief that he's the protagonist of this story, and he's not incorrect. Honestly, I don't really blame the guy for believing he'd have magic, or for feeling a little bit cheated when he doesn't. I'd feel cheated too. This is the first time the show is going to communicate to us how genre savvy Subaru is, and how many expectations he has of the world because of this. As he pretty much says himself, the world is designed around his success. Or at least it should be, but it definitely isn't. The way Amelia acts in this episode is also really typical, to the point where she almost becomes a different character later. I mean, she always keeps some of her shyness or her bashfulness or whatever you want to call it, but for good chunks of this first episode, she's pretty much a straight up tsundere, at least based on my understanding of the word. Of course I'm not going to save you, baka hentai, dairy, poon, blah, 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 all the typical stuff. But here's the thing. Amelia needs to be typical, both for the show's overall themes to land and for Subaru's mindset to develop. Think about it from Subaru's perspective. He's just been transported to a fantasy world. He doesn't know what the hell is going on, but he has some idea in his head of how things should play out. Of course, being mugged in a back alley is not on that list. Being saved by this pretty lady, though? That's on the list. That's fine. My point is that Amelia represents the typical life Subaru wants. The life that he's probably imagined for himself many times, and a life that he may even desperately feel he needs right now. His life's been turned upside down. Of course, he's going to want to be with this nice but somewhat tsundere-ish girl. Of course, he's going to be obsessed with her. That's not to say that his obsession with her isn't creepy, but it's still understandable. And it shows us that he's a big bomb of cringe just waiting to explode. And oh boy, is it going to explode. In this way, Subaru isn't just the positive side of the typical light novel protagonist, he's the negative side. And that negative side is created merely by making the light novel guy's actions a little bit more extreme, and by showing him in a slightly different light and putting him in slightly different scenarios. That is not to say that Subaru completely lacks in sincerity. There's one moment in particular that really stuck with me, where Subaru gives up his coin to make this little girl happy, which will make Amelia happy in turn. This shows us two things. First, that Amelia brings the best in Subaru out. And second, that Subaru is willing to give up his normal life to be with Amelia. After all, the coin was established as a symbol for Subaru's mundane life in the show's first scene, when he chose not to give it away and to keep it for himself. So him giving it away here carries definite weight and definite sincerity. This is the first part of Subaru's character that I really like, these glimmers of sincerity. The show goes on to give us a good dose of horror signifiers, dogs howling, moonlight, worn down house, creepy doll, the typical stuff. These things, combined with this shot where Subaru's got a sword going into his belly, gives us a pretty good indication that Subaru is going to die here. Which he does, of course, and Amelia does too. Her hand lands right in the moonlight, which is just such a typical romantic image. He grabs her hand, and boom baby, he's back at the Appaman stall. As far as more negative things about Subaru are concerned, well, it all boils down to one thing pretty much. His pride. Some of the best examples of his pride occur in his negotiations with Elsa. Notice how I don't use the word confidence to describe him. I think there's a big difference between confidence and pride, and Subaru definitely embodies that difference. But we'll get into that more later, just as the show itself will. He's also really awkward, mainly because he's so extreme about everything. Using this awkwardness as a sort of humorous disguise, he twists situations into something that they weren't. Like when he tells Amelia that he's her savior, and well, no, he wasn't. Yeah, he helped, but did you see all the work that Amelia put in? That's definitely more than this little buck we put in. He acts like she owes him something, but why should she? I mean, a person doesn't get to do something nice for somebody else and then hold it over their head and go, hey, I did a good thing and now you owe me, but damn it, aren't I a nice guy? I mean, you don't owe me too much. Subaru's level of self-entitlement is only going to ramp up now. Like how he thinks Amelia should be with him for his tour around the mansion, even though he knows that she's super busy. The show also takes on these sorts of tricky tones, or facets of Subaru's personality that are later going to be shown in a negative light or shown in a fairly positive light. Like him talking about how he wants what he wants in the exact moment that he wants it, or how he just doesn't really listen to Amelia as she talks, but just keeps saying that he wants her to go with him to the village. This way of acting is what's going to lead to one of the most uncomfortable instances of white knighting I've ever seen. However, one thing about Subaru to note is that his actions generally make sense, even if it can be hard to relate to him sometimes or if he's just really annoying. For one, his love for Amelia never once confused me, as I already went into, and the way he acted towards her also never confused me. He's an awkward guy. That, combined with the fact that he keeps growing closer and closer with her and with the others in the mansion, while they forget everything he's done, makes it seem pretty natural when he becomes more and more familiar with them without giving them the chance to do the same. My favorite way this is shown is through how Subaru calls Amelia Amelia-tan. The first time he says this, he's uncomfortable with the fact that he just said it, and basically tells her to forget about it. Sure, calling her that in the first place is a little bit weird considering how much they know each other, but it was just a slip of the tongue and he takes it back. However, with each progressive redo of the events in the mansion, he becomes more and more comfortable with calling her by that name, and more comfortable with explaining what that name means. Based on the fact that Subaru is dying in some pretty brutal ways and his mental state is kind of crumbling, I don't necessarily blame him for this. Of course, he's acting kind of nutty and not necessarily considering others' feelings, but I don't know. I think with looming death to think about, that makes some sense. Anyway, let's get to talking about Best Girl and the Blue-Haired One.
What did you just say about my waifu? What did you just say? Who do you think you are? I hear you talking shit about my waifu. One more time, I swear, I'm gonna rip off your fucking head with your fucking skull. If you talk shit about my waifu, you better be ready to die. Talk shit about my waifu.
Yes, as I was saying, let's talk about Best Girl and the Red-Haired One. Subaru's immediate obsession with maid outfits, while simply fitting for his character, is actually really important. As Rem says herself, that outfit always shows her and her sister's place in the hierarchy. Rem embodies typical subservience and devotion, while Amelia is her own person, who is always wearing different outfits and looking a little bit different. Amelia is a person who has wants, hopes, dreams, aspirations, all of that which is shown simply through the little things we hear her say and the outfits she wears. Rem, meanwhile, goes from fairly mysterious in her wants and needs to being obsessed with Subaru. I'm not saying that this doesn't make her endearing, but it definitely makes her character's position in the story always relative to Subaru's. Her motivation always revolves around him, and never around something else, whether that be killing him or helping him. Rem's want to murder Subaru makes rewatching these episodes pretty sad if we consider them from Subaru's perspective. There are a lot of little moments where the other characters are clearly getting hints of the fact that Rem wants to kill him, but they just don't do anything about it. And the fact that Rem kills Subaru, even after all the stuff he's done with her throughout that day, like going to the village with the kids, or having these little conversations with her. I mean, wouldn't that make you feel pretty disgusting when you find out that this girl has killed you? Subaru may be a bit whiny and pathetic sometimes, but can we really blame him? Episode 7 is pretty much our first real introduction to how serious this show can be, with Subaru turning into this angry, anxious, sad person. Yet still, he wants to believe the best in people, and he wants to do what he can to help them. After all, the thing which really gets this guy to decide that he's willing to leap off a cliff and die is the fact that Rem and Ram held his hands while he was sleeping. He weighs that small act of kindness against the fact that Rem lopped off his leg and he's like, yeah, you know what, I'm going to save you. And keep in mind that Subaru isn't even sure that he'll come back to life this time. He's aware of the fact that he might not wake up again. So I think it's safe to say that by the end of episode 7, Subaru has a little bit of redemption. Anyway, I think we've made it through a decent amount of this stuff in this episode of this video series. In part 2, I'll go into more, so that'll be coming soon. Thank you for watching.